Alright, the poem I'm having a little look at today then in terms of revision is Genetics. Again, one we've looked at, you've probably already got some notes on this. It's quite a short poem, and there are certain lines that are repeated in this, so this shouldn't take too long to get through. I will put up again the tasks that we usually do at the start of each of these lessons, and then as ever, if you weren't in when we were covering this poem, then just make sure that you pause and make sure that you've got those notes down, particularly the sort of initial interpretations that you've got of the poem, and then obviously this will give you a chance if you've missed anything to add any notes as well. Straight on to that starting activity then. So if you were not in, please do make sure that you pause and have a go at these. So you've got some definitions there to write out. You've got refrain, parallelism, tercet and quatrain. Hopefully you'd have paused that. So a refrain is a line or phrase that's repeated in a poem, very much like repetition there. Parallelism is the same grammatical structure is repeated in a text. We'll have a little look at that. I'll explain that as I show you it, but it is something that we have covered. Tercet is a 3-line stanza, and a quatrain then is a 4-line stanza. I'll do what I usually do. I will read through the poem and then I will put up some questions, and once I have done that, then we'll go through it stanza by stanza and analyse. So, genetics. My father's in my fingers, but my mother's in my palms. I lift them up and look at them with pleasure. I know my parents made me by my hands. They may have been repelled to separate lands, to separate hemispheres, may sleep with other lovers, but in me they touch where fingers link to palms. With nothing left of their togetherness but friends who quarry for their image by a river, at least I know their marriage by my hands. I shape a chapel where a steeple stands, and when I turn it over, my father's in my fingers, my mother's by my palms. Demure before a priest reciting palms, my body is their marriage register. I reenact their wedding with my hands. So take me with you, take up the skin's demands, for mirroring in bodies of the future. I'll bequeath my fingers, if you bequeath your palms. We know our parents make us by our hands. Alright, so you've got there a couple of very straightforward, only 3 questions. So what do you infer from the title of the poem? What is the poet's thoughts on marriage and divorce? What significance does the structure of the poem have? So again, if you were not in for that lesson, just pause that so you've got your own initial critical perspective then that you start from in terms of your notes, and then we'll pause, we'll go through it. Alright, hopefully we have then gone ahead and pause that and you've got your own initial thoughts down. I'm going to go back to the start of that poem then, and I will do as I usually do and work my way through it stanza by stanza, just explaining some of the ideas I've had from reading this and some of the ideas obviously I've taken from others then as well, to either reinforce what I've already believed or to offer an alternative perspective on what my thoughts were. So we've got the title there, Genetics. Now when we read the rest of the poem, as we were reading it there, the rest of the poem is written in quite a sort of simple, straightforward manner. It's not necessarily colloquial, but it's certainly a bit more straightforward. It's less kind of hidden meaning in what's being discussed. But genetics there, that sort of vocabulary choice, contrasts. It's more scientific in terms of the lexis that's being used there. Scientific's where the poem is more kind of plain or even childlike in certain points. So we already initially have this idea of what the poem's going to contain. If we're talking about genetics, we're talking about this idea then of passing on what we pass on in our genes, in our maybe our sort of physical appearance, and I suppose to a certain extent, depending obviously on what theory of science we want to look at, but whether there's certain parts of our personality or our attitudes that are passed sort of along in our genes as well, in our genetics. On to the first stanza then. So my father's in my fingers but my mother's in my palms. So we have parallelism here, where she's kind of uniting her parents. There's union in the way she's describing that. So what I mean by that in terms of parallelism, my father's in my fingers, my mother's in my palms. It's the same structure in how the sentence has been constructed, so that's what we mean by parallelism. So we've got this almost like unification of her parents, and the poem's full of this, and we discussed this in class as well, where we said there's lots of examples of unity, but also there's lots of examples of division, because we could talk about the caesura here. We've got this pause created by the comma, but also by the idea of the but, that coordinating conjunction. We could argue that it both unites that line, that sentence, but also divides them as well, because it's offering an alternative, therefore dividing and showing a difference. However, that sort of the comma, the caesura, that pause, it's division. However, it's separating two ideas that through the use of parallelism have been combined and linked. I lift them up and look at them with pleasure. It's interesting, this description she uses here. It's sort of she finds joy in her parents' union and in the fact that she's been created from both of them. And there's a remnants of happiness despite the fact that it's clearly ended in a separation, her parents' marriage. I know my parents made me by my hands, and this line is repeated in the poem. So we have this refrain, I know my parents made me by my hands. And it's interesting, I know when we were talking in class, this the tone of this poem, we could on one hand offer a very kind of desperate attempt to maintain the relationship her parents had, where she desperately wants them to stay together, and that's why she finds such a joy in the union. But also it could be interpreted alternatively as acceptance of the fact that her parents have separated, but that there's an acknowledgement they were together long enough that they actually produced her, and she finds joy in that. They may have been repelled, so interesting use of the words there as well, repelled, suggesting that they've been forced away from each other. And I think again in class we discussed this idea of magnetism almost, where, you know, with magnets, opposite ends of a magnet will repel each other, similar ends of a magnet will repel each other rather than attract. So it's a very strong, forceful description there. To separate lands, it's almost hyperbolic here as well, this vast divide, vast separation. To separate hemispheres, this repetition of the idea of the difference between them being so extreme. May sleep with other lovers, but in me they touch. There's almost, I mean, that metaphor there it's quite sort of comforting, but also there's an element of intimacy there as well, but in me they touch. So this idea that, you know, they've gone on to have sexual relationships with other people, but the sexual relationship they had when they were together produced her. So there's a kind of intimacy in what she's saying there, in me they touch, where fingers link to palms. So she brings it back to the hands, and again this is interesting because your hands carry sort of individual fingerprints, for example. There's very much a lot of our identity in our hands. So that interesting that she's used that as a symbol of their togetherness, and where she sees a joining of her parents in herself. So with nothing left of their togetherness but friends who quarry for their image by a river. Now this is where the language becomes a little bit less transparent, and there's a little bit more of an implicit meaning here. With nothing left of their togetherness but friends. So people maybe that do not accept that change, that find it hard to see them as separate people. Maybe they've been in that relationship for so long it's difficult for people to see them as separate entities. Who quarry for their image by a river. So maybe constantly changing. It's interesting that she's used this symbolism of water. And a river, although in our lifetime we tend to not see a river change its course, very gradually rivers do. They change course because we know that they can erode parts of the riverbed, they erode parts of the sort of banks alongside them, and they can change course. But also the water in a river is never still either. So this idea of them searching for images, searching for who these people were when they were together, it's not going to happen because they've changed, and like the river, the people, the mother and father have changed as well because they're no longer together and with each other. At least I know their marriage by my hands. So again, coming back to the symbolism and the importance of the hands there. I shape a chapel, so we've got a religious reference here now, maybe a link to that idea of the vows of a marriage. And again, we can consider whether this is to be taken in the tone of her desperately searching for this idea that, in a marriage vow, it's meant to be till death do us part, and there's part of her there that sort of mourns that loss and kind of trying to show that her parents should have stayed together, or whether it's just this acceptance. Again, you can offer both of those alternative interpretations. And when I turn it over, my hands by my father's by my fingers, my mother's by my hands. So again, we've got this refrain, and again, we've got this idea then of blurring the lines as well between mother and father. And what she's doing there, she's making a reference. So whether any of you have done this, where you create a chapel using your hands, and then you've got the sort of little doors there, and then you flip your hands over and you've got the people inside, and that's what she's doing. And it's a very sort of childlike imagery that's being created there through her description of, she's shaping this chapel where the steeple, which is the towers, stands, and when I turn it over, so she's talking about the sort of fingers that represent the people, but actually she then makes reference to the hands again. My mother's by my palms, demure before a priest reciting palms. There's emphasis then on this idea of being demure, of being sort of quietly graceful before a priest reciting palms. Interesting as well that there's an allusion there, the sort of idea that these words are very similar in terms of palms being hymns and verses from the Bible, being a section of the Bible, but also it makes reference to palms as well. They sound very similar. It's homophone, so it's an interesting word choice there. My body is in their marriage register. My body, is their marriage register. So that idea as well may be clinging to the idea that they should have remained together. I reenact their wedding with my hands. So this verb as well, reenact, almost plays into the childish imagery that's created in the previous stanza as well. Again, emphasis on the wedding vows and emphasising that sort of key word there, the idea of wedding, marriage, and palms all sort of linking together then as well into a lexical set of biblical and religious imagery. So take with me, and we have a shift here now, we have almost a volta, a change. So take me with you, so we've got this different shift now in personal pronouns as well. Take up the skin's demand, so it's almost this idea of a sort of a drive, a biological drive then for mirroring bodies, so links back to the river imagery maybe as well, this idea of searching for something of the future, so producing then your own children that mirror your own qualities, aspects, appearance. I'll bequeath my fingers, so to bequeath something is to pass it on to someone, almost like an heirloom, to pass it along to someone else. I'll bequeath my fingers if you bequeath your palms. So she's asking her partner to do as her parents have done and create a child that then will have the genetic makeup of her and her partner. We know our parents make us by our hands, so again there's that significance there as well. But she wants to perpetuate her own genetics as well in the same way. In terms of structure then, clearly to see links back to the starting task that we have these tercet stanzas, and then it changes. We almost, like I said, have this volta, this break, where it becomes a quatrain. And we see that shift there because she's got this emphasis on genetics all the way through, but at the end then, the final stanza, she directly addresses her partner in this idea of establishing almost a reasoning for why she wants to and why they should sort of have a child as well. So moving on then, I'm just going to get straight into the themes. This is again a much shorter poem than what we've looked at previously. It's got three key themes there, family being one of them, so that key idea then of family and what we have passed on to us, and also the family makeup there as well, because it's not necessarily a stereotypical family makeup that she's talking about. with her parents being separated. Identity then, so part of her makeup is her genetics, and that's key in this poem. Conflict, again, another key idea that's been explored in other poems that we've looked at, but we definitely get a sense of there being conflict in terms of her parents and their split and their divorce, when she talks about them being sort of repelled to other lands and other parts of the world, almost hyperbolically as well, this idea of wanting to be as far away from each other as possible. So that's explored as well in this particular poem. I've only got very short bibliography there again because, as I said, it's quite a short poem, but by all means make sure that you are searching and having a little look for some of your own ideas as well, and then to add to your notes. As always, any queries, any questions, any problems, just drop me a little message in our Google Classroom or in our through our email, our school email.